First Audit and Governance Committee of the year. First, I would like to report apologies for absence. We've got 3 members of the committee here, Councillor Fry, Councillor Ross Smith and Councillor Munkongi. And we have Councillor Pressel substituting for Councillor Chapman, Councillor Coyne substituting for Councillor Carrez, and Councillor Edward Mundy is expected as a substitute for Councillor Hall. So we are quorate. We also have a number of officers in the room and a number of officers joining on Zoom tonight. First order of business is election of chair. So do I have nominations for chair for the committee, please? Councillor Munkongi. Can everybody use their microphones, by the way?
I nominate Councillor James Fry.
Councillor Fry. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Coyne. Any other nominations? Can I see those in favour of Councillor Fry as chair, please? Okay, Councillor Fry, I'll hand over the chair to you if you want to take your seat.
Thank you very much. I look forward to another busy year. Now we've got the next item is the election of a vice chair. Do I have nominees for vice chair? May I nominate Councillor Munkongi? Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Any other nominees? No? All those in favour, please indicate. Welcome, Joey. Thank you. Again, powerful team, I hope, yet again. Are there any declarations of interest from members? Hearing none, we can go straight on to agenda item 5, which is the presentation of his report by Scott Warner. I always say we don't invite him too often so he doesn't get big-headed. But anyhow, Scott, would you like to introduce your report briefly?
Yes, thank you for that, Chair. Okay, so yeah, for anybody that's not familiar with me, my name is Scott Warner. I'm the manager of the counter-fraud team. So the aim of the annual report is to summarise...
Chairman, I can't hear you at all.
I have
very, very faint.
Hello, is that better? I was too far away from the microphone. Let's try that again. So taking it from the top, I'm Scott Warner, the manager of the counter-fraud team. So the aim of the report is to summarise the performance of the counter-fraud team for the 2021 financial year. I'll provide a brief summary of the content and then invite any questions afterwards. Now, to say that it's been an unconventional year for the team, or for anyone else for that matter, probably a bit of an understatement. And if you turn your attention to Table 1, you'll see that our first performance measure fell short of the target. Due to the pandemic, the team were only able to recover 3 council-owned properties in the period, properties which are being misused in some way. Although a large percentage of the work we do can be completed remotely, there are physical aspects to it which we cannot do or could not do because of the restrictions in place. So things like visits, interviewing witnesses, interviews under caution with suspects, surveillance, and so on. There was also a ban on evictions for the large part of the year as well, so notices to quit and seeking possession weren't being served. But that target's made up of 2 components, and we normally achieve that with a roughly an even split of properties recovered and applications for housing stopped. And we were still able to stop 13 fraudulent and irregular applications from progressing, as that element was obviously not affected by the pandemic. The other target we fell short on the year is at the foot of that table, and that's trading income. It was a struggle for us to engage in any meaningful business development activity over the course of the year with the restrictions in place. So normally we'd attend conferences with our trade stand, and we deliver our own physical counter-fraud conference in the town hall, which was not possible during 2020. But our 3 remaining targets were all exceeded, and one of them in quite an exceptional way. If you turn your attention to Table 2, that gives a breakdown of each of the areas represented in Table 1 and how they've been achieved. And you'll note from the last entry on that table, COVID business grants is where the team excelled in protecting public funds over the year. Thanks to the suite of verification and validation checks that we put in place, £6.5 million worth of business grant money was not paid out where it otherwise would have been were it not been through these checks and the actions and interventions of my team. Now that's clearly not a value we'll be able to achieve year on year, but it's one positive out of a very negative year. So that brings our overall target to just over 9.7 million, which is by far the best year for financial outcomes, and yet again something which I hope demonstrates value for money from the counter-fraud team. Section 5 sets out the fact that we ran our annual fraud conference last year using Zoom, and it was our most popular to date with 315 delegates online at its peak. And that's something we're pleased to find out that no other UK virtual fraud conference was able to achieve last year. It was very successful, had no technical issues, and the costs were more than covered through sponsorships and virtual exhibitors. As a point to note, we're going to be moving back to the town hall for this year. The conference is going to be taking place on the 24th of November, and members, you're all more than welcome to come along if for some or all of the event. You've got my contact details at the foot of the report, so if you'd like to come and see what we deliver, then do get in touch. Appendix 1 details internal investigations. That's a not for publication item, so I'll deal with that later. Paragraphs 9 to 12 explain that some of what we did from a commercial perspective. We're known externally as the Oxford Investigation Service, and we're now a very well-established brand with a reputation for quality. Paragraphs 13 to 20 set out details of our partnership working over the course of the year, and we managed to work with more than 21 different organisations in one guise or another. And that activity, even with a pandemic round to limit our effectiveness, still resulted in team-level trading income of nearly £270,000. And it's not just Oxford where we deliver value for money. We also achieved £1.6 million for our partner organisations. We recovered 6 social housing properties for them, and we provided a number of training courses and quality assurance work over the period. Paragraph 15 details the long-term contract that we've had with Warwick District Council being subject to review at the end of the last financial year, and I'm pleased to report that that has been extended by at least another 12 months. With the split of Cherwell and South Northants taking place, the joint contract to deliver counter-fraud services became 2 separate contracts. Cherwell opted not to use us beyond the end of the financial year, but the West Northants contract has now been extended to December this year. Paragraphs 19 and 20 detail the shared service arrangement we entered into with Reigate and Banstead Borough Council, and that partnership continues to gather momentum during the current financial year with a number of proactive initiatives underway. The sections dedicated to COVID-19 explain the adjustments we had to make as a team, but also the new opportunities that came out of that with new business in parts of the country which would have been previously unable to reach. The adoption of remote working as a business as usual item for many organisations has opened up possibilities for us to widen our commercial radius. As a result, we've now got contracts as far north as Stafford. There's also further mention of COVID-19 business support grants, which started out as just 2 schemes in April 20, but soon grew to 27 separate schemes by December. That placed a huge burden on resources in the team, as well as other teams that we work with to deliver that successfully. And the last part of the report summarises the financial effectiveness of the team as delivering more than a 2,000% return on investment during the year. That does take business grants into account, so perhaps not the most tangible reflection of our work, But without the inclusion of the £6.5 million in prevented grant fraud, the team still managed to deliver £3.18 million in additional revenue and prevented fraud losses. So that's a return of 677% on costs. In terms of business grant fraud that was identified in the period, the more organised of those attempts would be referred to NATIS, the National Investigation Service. They've been appointed by the government to investigate those types of frauds. And that concludes my report. I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Do members, I can see Ros has her hand up. Ros?
Thank you. That's not a good start, is it? That's my name tag. Well, that's great news that you've managed to stop fraudulent claims for grants. Were there any appeals? I mean, we have had several small companies go out of business in Oxford. I see your comment says that when you contacted the original business owners, they had no idea of the applications. Were there then the business owners, were they then encouraged then to apply for the grants for help with their businesses? And were there any appeals? So 2 questions there. And if so, how were the appeals dealt with?
Okay, yes. So there were a number of representations made by individuals purporting to be business owners, and when in fact our inquiries revealed that they had nothing to do with those businesses. And a lot of those weren't entitled just because of their dynamics and their arrangements, but those that were encouraged to make an application.
Sorry, the appeal, did you answer the question?
I turned my microphone off too quickly there, apologies. Yeah, so there is an appeals process in place, and that was those appeals are dealt with by the revenues team. So there's a strict entitlement criteria, and those appeals are considered on their merits and individually.
Susanna?
One question, if I could follow up, Chairman. Thank you. So from your fraud
Can you talk into your microphone?
Sorry, can you hear me all right?
No.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to lean this across. So from your investigations, are there any procedures that you would like to suggest change with regard to grant applications so that there isn't so much work involved for your team in future?
Well, thankfully, this particular set of grant schemes have just come to an end. There's going to be some additional work later in August, some residual work, but no more COVID business grants unless the future changes, touching wood. But in terms of the whole grant application process elsewhere, we've found a number of effective solutions in terms of verification, which we'll be making recommendations that are implemented council-wide.
Chairman, sorry, can we know what those procedures will be? What procedures you're going to recommend for changing?
Unfortunately, that is not something I'd wish to discuss in a public forum, because that would divulge methodology, and that perhaps could be used to take advantage of the scheme. But more than happy to have a conversation with you outside of this environment.
Okay. Susanna?
Thanks. Yes, I've got several questions. Shall I ask them all at once? Right. Well, it's an amazing achievement again. You've done fantastically well. But it makes me think that perhaps some of the targets were a bit too low. If you can meet them so easily, but maybe that's a bit mean. And I also wanted to ask about the conference. You had fantastic attendance at the last one, and that was probably because it was online. So I'm wondering whether you perhaps shouldn't have it online again instead of the town hall. And another one about the partners, as you call them, the other councils and so on, who you work for and with. I believe you used to do the fraud investigations for Oxfordshire County Council, and now you don't. So I just wondered why they stopped using you. And then just 2 more things, I think. You said that you hand over the fraud cases to this other body which investigates them, and clearly a lot of them were criminal. Do you happen to know what the outcome was? Have they been prosecuted or sent to prison or something? Because I hope they have, really. And then the last thing was about the confidential appendix, and I didn't want to refer to it in detail, so I don't think we need to
We
close.
can come to that afterwards,
Okay,
I suggest.
we'll come to that afterwards then. So have you? Shall I mention those questions again, or have you managed to remember them?
I made some notes as you was asking those, so
Well done.
I'll try and go through them in order. With respect to the targets, to say that we get them easily it is probably not the case. It was hard work to get those targets, but we exceeded them, and that's something we're quite proud about. As you'll see, this is the first year I've come to this environment and reported that we've not hit 2 targets, which is disappointing, but obviously there is suitable mitigation in place. We do review the targets on an ongoing basis, and I think given that we're in a very changeable environment at the moment, it'd be remiss of us if we didn't reconsider the targets now, with a view to perhaps decreasing rather than increasing. I'd be bold to suggest. In terms of the conference being online and very successful, yes, absolutely, it was the most successful version we've done of the event. Now, when we run the conference, it's free to attend for delegates, and exhibitors pay to attend the event. That's how we cover our costs and make a small margin as a contribution to overheads. The exhibitors expressed that they didn't get as much engagement from delegates as they would have in a physical environment, and as a result, they didn't get leads, which led to contracts. And that they've always seen the Oxford Fraud Conference as a very successful platform to establish those connections, and that was absent for them. Given that they fund the event, we have to take their feedback seriously. So we'll be staging the event as a physical event once again. Partners, Oxfordshire. We were providing services to them. That arrangement came to an end as they elected to create an in-house resource, and the reasons for that, I think, are financial, but I wouldn't want to speculate any further on that. The National Investigation Service, it's a simple answer to that one, it's too early. The cases have just been collated and referred over, and those investigations will take a considerable length of time. It's one service and one council doing the investigations for the whole of the UK. So we can expect some results in due course, but I don't think that'll be anytime soon.
For the conference, do you think it could be hybrid? Because some people who live far away, like Scotland or something, they might like to tune in virtually while you were running it here. I don't know if you've considered that.
We did consider that, yeah. But what we felt, and again we liaised with our exhibitors for this, is that if that option was available, people would choose it, and they wouldn't therefore come to the event when they might otherwise be able to do so. We're trying to stimulate as much footfall as we possibly can. And although it was successful delivering a hybrid event, the measure of that success for exhibitors is what they get out of it. And as I say, they are financiers of the event entirely.
Thank you. Chewy.
Thank you very much, Scott. Just like our previous speaker, Councillor Prussell, this is very very good and exceptional. My question is just on the trading income from commercial activities. I know you set up the target of 300, and you had achieved on that one, that we understand with your mitigation explanation there. But I just wanted to know the associated costs for that income, so that we can gauge if you did actually make a profit on that 268,000. So probably if you can just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so all of the contracts have a margin that's built in as business as usual. So the trading income that we did derive exceeded the costs that are dedicated to each of those contracts. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think in terms of the margins on the contracts, is clearly that would be commercially sensitive to be discussing in a public forum. Actually, I think we look at it in the table one. Actually, one of the indicators is achieving cost neutrality, and the cost of the team is about 500,000, and trading income alone was achieved at 268,000. Now, clearly, that's just income. That's just cash income from all our trading activity. The add-ons to that is around the £8.7 million of the financial losses prevented. So, there's far more than just the income coming from the trading activity, from people paying us money to do work for them, actually. But certainly every contract that I see with Scott basically has got a markup on it, actually. But clearly we don't wish to just disclose that markup in this forum.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to suggest...
Hi. On table 1, I just wanted to know how you're coming to the figure, the annual target of 22 for the number of social housing properties that would be recovered or applications stopped. I'm just assuming that year by year that's going to vary quite wildly potentially.
Actually, this is one of the targets that's been fairly stagnant over the years, and that was set some time ago. I think it was 2015 on previous performance and what we did, where there was no target around that particular activity. So we used a figure which was average performance, but also stretching. We also recognised that our work had been successful in that area, so we then divided that target to count applications towards it as well, because each one of those has a similar outcome. By preventing a housing application from going forward, you're preventing any potentially temporary accommodation costs, and equally, if you recover a property, then a family that's kept in temporary accommodation can be housed, and that property being used is back in use responsibly. But in terms of the target, we feel that it's pitched about right. We've hit it every year, either on the nose or 1 or 2 above, and this is the first year, because of external factors, that we've not achieved it.
Thank you. I was going to say that if there are questions about the confidential appendix, then we need to go into private session. You have a question, is that right, Susanna? I mean, do you have one? Because we can then go into private session.
Not really. It's a comment which doesn't go into detail.
I'm going to suggest that we do go briefly into private session, just to make sure people aren't inhibited in asking questions. Do I have agreement of the committee? Okay, thank you.
Open up. Right. Luke, can I ask you to start us up again? Thank you. Good. Thank you.
I will repeat my thanks to you, Scott, and we look forward, those of us in particular on the budget panel are interested to know what your targets will be for next year. But anyhow, look forward to seeing you again. I think you tend to come twice a year, is that correct? I'm looking actually at Nigel, I think that's true.
That's right, Chair, and with comments like that, his target will be higher for next year, actually, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So now let's proceed to agenda item 6 on risk management. I'm not sure whether, is it Bill Lewis who's going to introduce it on Zoom or Nigel? Maybe are you ready, Bill, to introduce?
I am, Chair, yes, if you're ready. Okay, this report is actually looking at both the Q4 risks for 2021 and also the Q1 risks of 21-22. Now, if I deal with it looks at corporate risks and service related risks. So if I deal with just the corporate risks first, in Q1 of 2021, there were 2 existing amber risks around economic growth and the balancing and delivery of the financial plan, which were increased to red status, ready for Q1 due to the challenges arising from COVID-19 in March 2020, which actually resulted in 3 red risks, including the existing housing red risk relating to housing delivery and supply. But by the end of 2021, the financial risk was reduced to amber, but 4 new red risks had been added around economic growth, negative impacts of climate change, which had moved from green to red because of the increasing imperative to take action around climate change, and then 2 new risks relating to the customer experience strategy. Now, for the movement from Q4 to Q1 21-22, the number of red risks has reduced to 3, and that's because the 2 former red risks on the customer experience strategy, which were added in Q4, had been reduced to amber. On the service risks, in Q1 2021, the number of red risks had decreased from 6 to 5, with the change being a computer system risk, which had moved to amber. But by Q1 of 21-22, this moved back to red. So in Q1 21-22 compared to Q4 2021, the number of service red risks has increased from 5 to 9, with 1 previously red risk reducing to amber, which I've just referred to, and 5 risks increasing to red. So the increased risks are around ICT relating to system implementations, and then the remaining ones are in regeneration and major projects. And these are health and safety compliance, because it's felt that additional training is needed. Staff budgets, where there's actually a lack of a kind of ongoing budget because a lot of staff are financed through grant, and so therefore they can't have a permanent budget, and that grant funding is running out in 22-23. Also, support team capacity to deliver projects, which is kind of interrelated with the previous one, and also project delays, both due to project management of projects or also unforeseen circumstances, which generally happens on projects. So I think that's kind of a quick summary, so it's probably best if I hand over for questions.
Thank you very much, Bill. Do I have questions from members of the committee? If not, I mean, may I start off with one question which is fairly specific? It refers to problems in city centre management and economic development. I can't quite remember, I'm just trying to switch on my computer, but could you explain a bit more? Was it a lack of funding for positions? Is it, what's the problem?
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. It's actually because we've only got 2 permanent officers in these areas, and the rest of the teams are actually funded through different range of grant and fixed funding. And these run out in 22-23 at different points. So therefore, the risk has sort of escalated up to being red. The service is actually working to secure more external funding. But obviously, depending on whether that's successful, it may mean that either the service doesn't get as much resource as it was going to get, or there will have to be growth bids within the budget process, which, you know, given our budget pressures, may or may not be successful.
Maybe I'm looking for hands. If there's no, could I just ask a general question? There are an awful lot of red risks now, as you rightly, described. Is this I mean, it sounds worrying to me. Do you think these will be reduced as lockdown is eased, or do you see some of them you describe sound rather structural, over-optimism on projects and the like? I mean, do you see these as lasting problems?
I think part of it is probably around a sort of new service heads coming into position and actually looking at their service and realizing that in their perception they need to actually do some work to rectify what they see as issues. And this, for instance, the health and safety one doesn't mean that we're not complying with health and safety. It just means that the service head actually feels like there isn't consistent training across the service, and so therefore work has to be undertaken in order that the risk is alleviated. So I don't think it's necessarily just around the pandemic. It's actually around general improvement and realization that as a new person comes into a post, that there are gaps in what they see as being the correct delivery of the service.
Thank you. Susanna, you had your hand up.
Thanks. When we had our councillor training for audit and governance, just waiting for the chair to start listening. When we had our councillor training for audit and governance, we looked at risks, and they was kind of set out on one of the slides, and one of them was EDI, and I can't see that here, and I just wondered if I've missed it, or if which table it's in, or
EDI.
That's equality, diversity, and inclusion.
What was the level of risk on that? Because we're reporting red risks here.
Perhaps. Well, I hope we don't feel that we've nailed it and we're perfect as far as EDI is concerned. I mean, even if we were, perhaps it would be green, but I think we're not, so it should be amber. But don't worry, I'm a substitute, so I shouldn't really be talking much at all. So perhaps you could have a word with me online afterwards or something? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll have a look into that. Thank you.
Ros, I didn't see your hand up. You're hiding behind your laptop. Go on, please.
I can't change the size of the laptop. Thank you. It might be a question actually for Nigel. If you remember, Chair, we discussed in one of the finance budget scrutiny panels about 5, and indeed in full council, about 5 new posts for project management as such. And I was interested to hear the explanation from Bill this evening about 2 very permanent posts, and the rest were funded by the grants that we had for different projects. I just wondered, I can see that actually why that has gone into red, because that is dodgy. They're not actually, those 5 posts are obviously not, maybe I'm wrong, perhaps I'm looking to Nigel to correct me. They were not permanent posts, new posts, they were just 5 posts that would be temporary in their nature with regard to just delivering projects within grant funds. Is that correct, Nigel?
I think for me, remember in the budget discussion, I think there were a mixture basically of the two. Some were grant funded, and some not. What we tend to do with the project management posts, by and large, they are sort of focusing on capital projects actually, and we can actually, under accounting convention, we can actually capitalise the cost. So provided we've got the capital resources to do the project, then we can actually capitalise and charge the capital, in other words, the cost of those project managers to the project actually, and fund them by capital financing, so either via borrowing or capital receipts or whatever. So I think from recollection, the ones we're talking about are either funded from grant or potentially they've been capitalised basically and charged to the project.
Sorry, Chairman, could I come back? So I'm not quite sure if I've understood you correctly, or maybe I've not put my question right. Are you saying then that this is not a red audit response then that we need on here? It's an amber rather than a red. Are you suggesting that?
I think
Bill
might have more detail actually, Bill, on these particular ones.
Yeah, I think I think it's looking at 2 different aspects, because there are red risks on the actual project management side of things, and that is actually related to the number of projects that the council is actually trying to put through and put in place at the moment. There is also a red risk around the actual grant funding, which is relating to city centre management and economic development, not specifically project related. So I think there's slightly different areas in the service.
You're shaking your head, Ros. Did you want to follow up, or?
If I may, Chairman, I mean, there is a bullet point here on page 14 that says regeneration and measurement. This relates to poor project management of projects or unforeseen circumstances. I mean, is it both, or is it just unforeseen circumstances? I mean, I understand completely what you said, Nigel, about capitalisation of that. Yeah. We've talked about that before, but we're talking about regeneration and major projects. Poor project management, your report says.
I don't have any further details on this one, Bill, unless you might need to take it offline and provide an answer.
Yeah, I think that would need to be taken offline. I'm not entirely certain what the head of service means around that. Just from my opinion, based on the other answers I got off the head of service, I would think it's around additional training that the head of service requires. But it may also be down to capacity, because if you've got a project manager that's running a number of different projects, then they're going to be split over those, and they're not necessarily focusing as much as they need to on specific ones. So again, going back to my previous comment about the number of projects that the council is running with at the moment, that obviously has resourcing implications.
I mean, may I just ask, I know in earlier meetings I or someone has asked this, but for the other members present, how is the process operated for actually giving red, amber and green risks? Who ultimately decides? I know the author of this paper isn't present, at least Alison Nash is down as the author, but is it done by you and your colleagues in the finance team, or is it done by the relevant service areas themselves?
If I could come in on that one, it's actually done by the relevant service areas themselves. There is an oversight of the risks, both the corporate risks and also the red service risks at the risk management group. But the actual responsibility for the risk registers for each service is with the head of service for that area.
Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, and we must note this report, and I must thank you very much. Thanks, Bill. And I think we should go on to... Yasmin apparently would like to take agenda item 9 first. Is that correct? Thanks for that. And then we go back to 7. Yes?
Yes,
Thanks.
Chair.
Please, over to you, Yasmin.
Thank you. We're on page 81 of your packs for the progress report. Just in terms of progress against the 2021 audit plan to start with, we'll be presenting the income collection and cashiers report. This was a substantial on both operational effectiveness and design, and this is one of our highest assurance levels and will close the 2021 audit programme. I can present the findings to you shortly on that. We'll also be presenting the internal audit plan and the strategic plan for the next 3 years. That's agenda item 7, which I'll come on to shortly. The annual report, Gurpreet Dulay will be presenting the overall opinion for the council on that one. And then we've got the follow-up report for the company's oversight. The company's oversight audit report was presented at the last audit committee, and it's following up on all of the findings on whether they've been implemented and just the progress of those. That can be found on agenda item 11. And then we've got the follow-up report, which looks at the rest of the internal audit recommendations of higher medium recommendations for, and that's on agenda item 10, which I'll come on to shortly.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just be clear for everybody, particularly the substitute members? We're going to agenda item 9, then agenda item 7, and then agenda item 11. Is that correct, Chairman? 9 first?
We're just 9 is out of phase. We're going 7, 8, 10, 11.
My apologies, I thought you said page 81, which was agenda item 9, I believe.
It's page 81 of the packs, which comes onto its agenda item 9 to start with.
That's what I thought you said.
So
just be clear as to which way we're going, because it's
So it's 9 to start with. Then we'll come back to agenda item 7, then 8,
then 8, and then 11.
Yep, and then 10.
Right.
Okay. Sorry, apologies for the order on that.
We have questions. I have 1 or 2 on agenda item 9. Do any of the rest? Maybe I can ask my first question, which is a very simple but rather important one. On page 85, you have the table which shows the council's main source of income, which is very important. And then it says in the text, new homes bonus, housing and commercial rent, which we know have been affected, especially commercial rent in the pandemic. There is just 1 row there for new homes bonus, and I wonder, is something missing, or what is included? I don't know. Did you prepare? Did Nigel prepare?
Chair, so these are the income streams that we looked at within this area. So it was solely just for business rates, council tax, and the new homes bonus grant only. And this, so I can come on to the overall overview of that, if you'd like.
I think I was just asking whether having, it just says background, it mentions the main sources of income, and it gives a table which seems to be missing 2 important items, that's all. Is it correct, or was, which I doubt, that housing and commercial rent have somehow been included in the new homes bonus row. That was all. There are 5 items mentioned and only 3 listed.
Yeah, that's our mistake. We should have included the housing and the commercial rent within the table as well.
I mean, maybe if I could ask a more substantial point, because it's that we should note, and I'm not sure, maybe Nigel or Bill might want to comment on it. You mentioned, which is always very useful, reviewing what's happening more widely in the world of local government. And you mentioned, for example, page 90, Midlothian having lent to Croydon Council. Are there lessons there for us? And then page 91, the fair funding review has been pushed back for a couple of years, which is very important for us in terms of the medium-term financial plan. And then on page 92, the shorter period for business rates appeals, which are items to note. And I just wonder, can I ask Nigel or Bill to comment on how these rather important factors might affect us?
Yeah, if I pick up the Midlothian and the fairer funding one, and then Bill can pick up the appeals actually. But in terms of Midlothian, I mean, the point made there is that Midlothian lent to Croydon 13 million April 2020, and then subsequently Croydon issued a Section 114 notice. I think the point is, when I have monthly meetings with the Treasury team, one of the things I say to them is I think we should steer clear of those authorities that have or issue Section 114 notices. In reality, what is the risk? Are councils going to go bust? I don't think that is going to happen in reality, and it probably never will actually. But I don't want to be in a position where I'm needing to explain to members why I'm lending to an authority which seemingly has very substantial financial management issues, which would be driven by a Section 114 notice. So Midlothian, well, they can take their own advice actually, and I no doubt they got a good rate from Croydon actually. But as far as this authority is concerned and the Treasury investments that we make, I ask my team to steer clear of those authorities such as Croydon actually in this respect. In terms of fairer funding, that's good news for this authority. It won't be good news for other authorities and certainly some of our Oxfordshire colleagues actually. But from this authority's point of view, the amount that we get from business rates, and in particular, I won't go into too much detail, but business rates above a baseline. So this is all additional growth that we get, and certainly we've been enjoying from the Westgate, for instance. Once they bring in fairer funding, that will drop substantially, and my estimates within the budget are that our business rates will drop by at least around 2.5 million per year actually. So the delay on fairer funding, which is highlighted here, and I happen to think will actually happen, will give a bonus for the 22-23 financial year of about over £2 million to this authority, which will be very welcome indeed actually. So as I say, other authorities who are in a different position that are looking to get a bigger base would not say that, but certainly from this authority point of view, say that is welcome, and I hope it actually gets confirmed by the government, but it hasn't to date. Bill, do you want to pick up the sort of appeal side of things?
Yes, Chair. So on the appeal side, I mean, I think there's a concern around shorter business rates valuation periods, predominantly around the valuation office, who currently seem to be struggling with actually dealing with the existing appeals list gap. In the kind of current regime, we had a list drawn up in 2010, and then the following one was drawn up in 2017, and the government is wanting to put it to 3 years. Now, to put this in context, we have a number of appeals outstanding, against which we've got an appeals provision on the 2010 list still of 1.9 million, And on the 2017 list, which are in kind of various stages of whether they're just a threat or whether there's actually a challenge in place, of 14.3 million. So the concern, I suppose, the biggest concern is that if the appeals list renewal is shortened to 3 years, the valuation office will not be able to cope. The amount of outstanding appeals will increase, which actually therefore leads to uncertainty about the levels of provision that we need and ultimately the level of income that we can put through our revenue account. Because we have to base our appeals on what we think based on all of the information available. We have to make a provision on what we think the impact will be. And so the longer these things are outstanding, the longer we have that provision sitting there and that level of uncertainty.
It sounds either way it's not very good in terms of certainty, at least, and keeping the reserves. I had hoped this meant that if they hadn't resolved it by then, by default, we would be allowed to continue with whatever we had set, but that is not the case. I mean, what is the default if the 3 years are not met, that deadline?
Well, largely that's down to the government and deciding when the valuation actually happens. I mean, if they decide it's going to be 3 years, then it will be met. But what will happen is that the valuation office will concentrate on actually undertaking the valuations rather than dealing with the appeals. So it tends to have a build-up of backlog. What happened on the transition from the 2010 to 2017 list was that there was a deadline by which all businesses had to actually make the appeal, but there's no actual deadline on when that appeal is actually heard and when it's resolved. Hence, we still have outstanding appeal provision relating to that period. But we do know that there will not be additional appeals relating to that period.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from members? Chewe.
Thank you, Chair. My question is actually following up on what you're saying, Chair, on the sector update. And in this instance, I'm talking about under section housing on page 93. To Yasmin first, and then ask Najo. I can just see there that, the housing company fully owned by Luton was threatened to be struck off from the company's register, I reckon. And that's quite embarrassing. And the response there was administration error that I don't believe to be the truth. In your internal audit processes, do you go as far as knowing if the companies, wholly owned companies, has been filed correctly? Then to Naju, what is your comment about our wholly owned companies, HLC and ODS? Are we up to date with our filing obligations? Thank you.
If I start, actually, and if Yasmin wants to come in, actually. I mean, in terms of filing the accounts, I mean, the companies themselves basically undertake that process, actually. So the company secretary, Lindsay Kane, in both companies would actually pick that up. I'm sure it's something that the external auditors, Mazars, would actually pick up as well as part of their external audit. So I would be surprised if the two companies ever foul of the position that Luton finds, or the Luton Borough Council's wholly owned company finds itself in, actually. In terms of just generally in terms of our companies, I mean, the trading conditions are still extremely difficult, certainly for OCHL and ODS. I mean, we might hear from Simon later on, actually. but they are getting back on the road to recovery. I think the returns and the dividends that come back from those companies just need to have assurance from them that we are going to achieve those because of the interaction with our medium-term financial plan. But there's no doubt that COVID, basically over the last 12 months or so, 18 months, has basically had quite an impact on both of those areas actually. But hopefully they start to spring back.
If I could just come in on the filing
Yes.
aspect, because my team also get involved on the filing of accounts, because obviously we're involved in the production of the accounts and the audit and sign off. Quite often, my team will actually file the accounts, and we do actually monitor Companies House to ensure that both the accounts are registered as having been filed, because it is a bit of an antiquated process in that you can't email them in, they've got to be actually sent by post. And also making sure that the company annual return, which is a separate matter, also happens, because obviously we have responsibility for the audit of those companies, and we want to make sure that everything is being done properly and on a timely basis. So there's the additional check from my team as well.
Thank you. Yasmin, would you like to comment on any of these points?
Yes, Chair. So if we were requested to do an internal audit review within this area, we can pick up the controls and processes and whether files are filed on a timely basis. But we would usually leave this to external audit and then the in-house management controls as well. But again, if we are requested to look at that in the terms of reference, that's something that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it sounds to me as if Bill is keeping an eagle eye to make sure that they are submitted in the proper form by the due date. So I don't know. Well, we can discuss if anyone wants anything. I was going to say, if there are no more questions on this one I think is another one we have to note, but maybe we can go now to agenda item 7, if that's okay, the annual plan. Are you introducing it, Yasmin, or Gurpreet? Which of you?
Sorry, it'd be myself, Chair. So just in terms of agenda item 7, the annual internal audit plan, this is for approval. So in terms of just putting the plan together, we reviewed the Council's risk register, the corporate plan. We discussed the plan at the operational delivery group as well, and Nigel had his input on the plan too, and also our knowledge of the council and where we think the risks lie as well. We're presenting a 200-day annual audit plan for this year, and then that will progressively reduce in 2022 and 23 to 195 days, and then 190 days in the third year. I'd like to take any questions on the plan if there is anything at this stage.
If no others, may I kick off, and you'll see there is a theme to these. On page 37, I mean, you're familiar with the problems we've had with the QL area and project and the wider ICT area. I suppose I would say, and I'm not quite sure, you've got various references on page 37, but I would like, as a matter of urgency, and it comes up again if we go down to page, I think it's 39, it comes up in the context of housing rents, which it does refer, I think, to QL and that context, and then project management on page 41. I just wonder, and I don't know if there is a plan to include that somehow, specifically this whole question of ICT, management of projects and the like. Do you see this as being covered under any of these headings that you have? And I would like to see it personally in this current financial year rather than pushed to a later year.
So, Chair, if you can hear me, I'm happy to take that one. So, no, it's not specifically covered in the way that I think that you might want it to. So, for QL, the reviews that we have here may touch on some of the themes or elements of that, whether it's project management or wider IT, but they won't be specific or specialist or tailored enough to, I think, cover some of the challenges on the back of the QL work, the QL challenges that are currently happening. So in answer to the question, no. The second part to that would be, whilst we present a plan, and Chair, you'll know this from previous years, it's an adaptable plan. If things need to change, then that happens during the year, and we'll inform the committee of changes and get, where possible, outside of committee chair approval, but then also retrospective committee approval. So we're happy to have those conversations. I know some conversations around QL have happened across different levels of the group structure. So we're happy to engage in that, and whether that means something comes out of the plan or it's an addition to the plan, we can operate on kind of either of those. I think it's more just about understanding the scope and what we're looking at. But currently, I would say the plan doesn't cover the area that you're looking for it to cover. So I don't think we should take that view, but we're more than happy to be adaptable to any changes that may come.
No, it's sufficient to say, Chair, actually, that the authority does intend to undertake a lessons learned review, basically, of the QL system. It's well known that we've had considerable problems in the implementation of that particular project, and those problems are ongoing, although a heck of a lot of the work has been done, and we've resolved a lot of issues, actually. But as I say, we do intend to do a review and lessons learned, whether that's BDO or any other independent organisation, actually, has yet to be decided, actually. But it's good to hear from Gurpreet, basically, that should he be asked, basically, that he could undertake that review, basically, and we might want to reflect that possibly going forward and possibly change the plan. But at this point in time, we're still in fixed mode, basically, and we haven't said when and who will do that review.
Thank you. Ros?
Thank you. I'm just sitting here a little confused now, so apologies. I thought that the comment, the reason for the inclusion and the comment there on page 39, that this review, there will be a review and it will give assurance to the Audits and Governance Committee that the QL area and system has got sufficient controls and processes in place to manage the housing rents effectively. Now that's the comment there on page 39. So I'm looking to you, Chairman, and to Nigel. So I thought we were going to get, that was going to be included in the plan, and that was going to be a good, clear review, and to give the A&G committee assurance that things were going well. Is that not, are you saying it's not going to be included now, or it is going to be included? Sorry, just to my
I think, yeah, just if I can, Nigel, do you want me to start on that one, or do you want to?
Yeah, go on. Yep.
Go on that one. I was going to say, I think there's two parts here. So as Nigel mentioned, there's a lessons learned piece about QL, which is obviously what's happened to date and whether those lessons have been learned and what that means moving forward, and has that had any impact into the how things operate. My worry by saying this review will cover all concerns and questions that Nigel has mentioned that have been discussed already as part of some lessons learned review, and somebody independent will be appointed. Obviously, without knowing the scope of what that may involve, the breadth of that, and being involved in conversations, I can't say for certainty that this review here is going to give the council all the assurances and all parts of the group over the areas that they may have concerns about. Looking at, our elements processed correctly and our policies being followed, yes, I'm sure this review will do that bit. But more widely about QL, how the whole process began, the story, if you like, from the beginning to now, the different relationships, the governance structures, etc. Will it give all of that? I can't say that for certain. And without knowing the scope of the other review, that's why I wouldn't want to sit here and say, yes, this will answer all questions that may be raised, because I personally, I don't think it will do. And it would need to be a wider and larger review for that to be done.
Nigel?
No, I agree with Gurpreet, actually. I don't think this review basically is intended to do what I term as a lessons learned. The lessons learned will look at how we ended up in the position that we are in, actually. What was the governance around the implementation? What checks and balances were done around that implementation, and how was the project managed? The review that's talked about here on page 39, for instance, on housing rents, will look specifically at housing rents following the implementation, the successful implementation of QL, and ensure that, as it says there are effective controls in the area of housing rent specifically, actually. So they are two different things, actually, effectively.
Chairman, is this a reflection back to a conversation we were having earlier this evening about poor management or lack of good management and project oversight? I mean, it sounds to me like the two might be linked.
Well, I think, not to prejudge why we are in the position we are in with QL, actually. It could well be poor project management, poor governance, etc. But I think that will come out in the lessons learned review that I talk about, actually. So I won't prejudge what that is, but it could very well be a factor.
Look forward to the review report.
Could I just ask, Susanna, then Chewe.
Thanks, Susanna. I was just wondering, probably you can just remind me why we don't have account payables in the table. Account receivables. We have got account payables, but not account receivables. Is it that because of the reduced risk, or am I just missing something?
We tend to do a cyclical review, so we'll either touch on accounts payables or accounts receivables. We did accounts receivables last year, so we're picking up accounts payables this year, and it'll just rotate around.
All right, thank you.
Susanna? Yes, I just
and in year 3 of the plan, we have accounts receivable. Sorry, we do have that in year 3 of the plan.
I just wanted to go back to the lessons learned review that Nigel's going to be instigating, perhaps. I wondered if BDO is going to be involved in that, or who will be involved?
That hasn't been decided yet. I believe BDO could undertake the review if they were requested, and Gurpreet might want to comment on that, actually, but it hasn't been decided who are going to do it. Obviously, within this current plan, there is an element of project management on the current audit plan, so some of it may well fall into there. But as I say, the authority really hasn't decided how, who and when that review will be undertaken, actually.
And could I also mention, in case you don't know, that BDO is the internal auditor also for ODS, which is greatly affected by the same issue. You were going to say something, Gurpreet?
No, just to agree with Nigel, yeah, we're happy. I think Greg Rubin's the partner from BDO had emailed around this when we had a discussion to say that we're happy to engage in a conversation, but depending on the scope, and as you mentioned, Chair, we are the auditors for both the City Council and ODS. We just want to make sure that if we are engaged in that as part of our current contract, that it doesn't compromise us in some way or cause any other challenges in the review, in which case we may suggest, well, actually, we don't think we're best placed to do this, and also the specialism that might be needed as well. So I think once there's been further conversations about the scope, we can answer that better. But for now, we're happy to engage in a conversation. We think we should be able to help, but we can't say 100% until we know more about the detail of what the review might involve.
Chewe?
Thank you, Chair. My question is just a general question. How are you going to be impacted by the reopening of the economy in terms of the audit work you are going to be undertaking? I ask this because I was worried when the economy was closed, because you had to do most of your work online, but you did actually come back to me and say, look, this is actually more to the advantage because you have to do more work and more to see more evidence, for example. But since we are reopening, how is it affecting you? Thank you.
I can answer that. So in terms, just at the start of the pandemic, there were some issues with, and audit work was taking a lot longer to complete. But as the council's moved on to, I guess, better systems, and we've gotten used to the technological environment. It's been working a lot better, and we've had no sort of issues trying to complete our work. Yes, some of the work hasn't been as timely as we probably wanted it to be, but there's been no issues in terms of completing our work to date.
I mean, thank you. I mean, could I suggest, I mean, we're asked to approve this plan. I mean, it sounds to me as if there may be a bit of flexibility during this year in terms of maybe somehow folding in the lessons learnt from the QL contract. And I thought you were very diplomatic in how you phrased that, Gurpreet. I mean, I do hope that that is agreed, at least that is it agreed as far as you know at cabinet level that there will be a lessons learnt report? Otherwise, I would like to suggest that this committee asks for one definitely to be undertaken as a matter of urgency this financial year.
Yeah, I think it's certainly, whether it's formally agreed, I don't know, but you know, I am absolutely certain that there will be a lessons learned report on QL. I just don't know when that's going to be done, and I don't know who's going to do it actually, and that's the subject of discussion, whether it's BDO or someone else actually. So yeah, I think that's the position at the moment.
So with that understanding, are we able to approve? This is the one we have to approve, so I take it that we are, other than the minutes later on, so I assume this is approved. So let's go to agenda item 8 if that's possible, the annual...
Thanks, Chair. Gurpreet will be presenting this one.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. So this is our annual opinion. So this is a look back over the 12 months from the 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2021, and a summary of our work. So you'll see on page 63 of the packs, it just lists there the different reviews that we did last year. It's worth noting just in the paragraph below that, and as Jasmine picked up on, whilst we completed all of our work last year, we did have to adapt how we worked, and that did mean that there were a few reviews, namely car parking, community strategy, environment and enforcement restructure, which we've moved to the current year plan that you've just approved. You know, things like car parking, for example, whilst we had it in our original plan, because of COVID, it didn't make sense, especially obviously early pandemic. There wasn't much activity, if any at all, so it didn't seem like an appropriate area to continue to look at. So we have that in this year's plan. So it's just worth noting that there were a slightly fewer number of reviews than expected, but that doesn't change our ability to give an opinion. Just after that, then we summarize our opinion. So there's 4 different opinions we can give. So this is under public sector internal audit standards. We have to give an opinion each year on your governance, your risk management and your controls from the reviews we've done and other sources of information. And on that, you can either be given substantial, which is the highest opinion, moderate, limited or none. And we have given a moderate assurance over the governance, risk and control environment for the council. There's a number of factors that lead into this. As you go down the report, what you'll see is from the work we did in the last 12 months, we issued no limited opinions. Everything was moderate or substantial, so that would support the overall opinion that we've given. Follow-up operated quite well. There are some that require a bit more time or get delayed. However, in comparison to the wider sector, it's operating quite well. But we do recognise, and there's probably a comment here, and it's been mentioned in different parts of this committee, which is there are a number of challenges in the next number of years in terms of financial, and obviously it sets out in the bullet points at the bottom of page 63 and the top of page 64 about the financial challenges that the council, and you're not alone, will be facing over the next few years. So whilst we have moderate now, the next 12 months and 24 months and beyond are going to be challenging. We have found that the effectiveness of controls have operated, well and moderately during the pandemic, and hopefully that continues. But we are also mindful that the sector as a whole is under enormous strain and pressure. And whilst we have moved kind of out of the core part of the pandemic, arguably, actually the impact and the legacy on financial challenges that might present will continue to go on. More positively, moderate we haven't actually issued a substantial for any local authority. So it's quite a hard achievement to reach. We have issued limited on some. So moderate, you're well within the pack, and arguably actually from the opinions that you have are ahead of other local authorities that we tend to see. So happy to take any questions, and the report takes you through the detail comparisons to prior years as well as other elements, but happy to take any questions.
Chewy.
Well, yeah, first I would just want to congratulate Nigel and everybody for the wonderful report. I mean, we have got substantial and moderate. We don't have limited, so this is job well done. I was just wondering why you haven't given any assurance on corporate performance.
Yeah, so this was a review where, well, it was days in our plan to look at corporate performance, and Yasmin might be able to add on to this one. But the stage that the council were at that time was, instead of us doing a review on corporate performance, we decided to do a workshop to support the council in developing its indicators for each of the service areas. Obviously, every service area has different indicators, different targets, etc. And I think probably partly because of the pandemic, there was a recognition in the authority that to look back at the structures and the indicators that are in place to make them more tailored and effective. So if we did a review, we'd arguably only tell them things that they know that they need to do already. So a better use of our time was to bring on board our skills to run a workshop and other support that we provided about the way in which performance indicators should be set, comparison to other local authorities, and guidance in that area. So this was an advisory review, not a assurance review, which we do from time to time. So there wasn't an opinion for that reason.
Yeah, and just to add, Chair, actually, that I think that workshop was just done just before the pandemic hit, actually. But we have used that workshop actually to put together the corporate and service indicators basically for the coming year, and you'll be seeing those as members as we go through the new year actually, through the business plan and the corporate strategy.
Ros?
Thank you. This particular report I find really interesting, I have to say, because it does give a very good recommendation about what the council should be doing within your findings as well too. The KPIs have been mentioned, I think, which is good. Just to be clear, are you saying that good KPIs had not been identified before you held this workshop? Just one question there. And also you're making recommendations on page 69 about companies' oversight with the companies. Are we, Chairman, being asked to agree those recommendations this evening and to make sure that they actually happen?
Yeah, so in terms of KPIs, no, but as this was an advisory review, it wasn't us giving an opinion to say that we thought the indicators were appropriate, reasonable, etc. So we weren't doing audit work, it was more advice about how they could be improved. Having reviewed this area in the past, in previous years, I know that the council, even prior to our workshop, had a reasonable process, as systems in place. I have no knowledge or any concern that there's any material control failings, etc. I think it was just more of a timely point at which the council looked at their indicators, and as you would do from time to time, to refresh them. Are they still up to date? And obviously, especially obviously whilst it impacted post-pandemic, if you had indicators in there before pandemic that were around, I don't know, the number of telephone calls that you're going to get, or the number of people who are going to present themselves at your front desk for support, well, actually that indicator is probably not as relevant now and needs to be amended and updated, etc., because of the different ways in which society engages. So I have no reason to think that the previous system, because I know we have reviewed this a couple of years ago, is inadequate. I think we actually gave it a moderate assurance previously. So no, we can't say that from this review, but I have no knowledge that it's not working inappropriately. And the second question around the approval, no, this is just a summary. That company's oversight report has previously come to this committee where they've reviewed it and looked at the recommendations, and we have a separate paper following up on the company's oversight report in this pack that Yasmin will pick up shortly.
Yes, Yasmin, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thank you. Just to touch on the KPI workshop, there was a specific request made where the service level indicators and the corporate indicators, there was too many of them for each service area, and they wanted to look to refine those. So as part of the KPI workshop, we came up with the top 3 indicators for each head of service, for each service area, and that was the main reason why this workshop came about as well. They just wanted to refine it a lot more.
That makes absolute sense, Chairman. Thank you. Good work.
I mean, do you know, I mean, just out of interest, the finance panel is now called Finance and Performance. Do you know, did this workshop, maybe Nigel knows, did it feed into sort of fine-tuning those targets which we're meant to review?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there was wide feedback to say it was a very good exercise run by BDO, if I recall. And as I say, you'll see these indicators basically, and there are some new ones from previous years. Basically, you'll see them coming through the corporate monitoring reports basically throughout the financial year.
Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, I think we just are meant to note this report, and again congratulate in particular Nigel's service area on getting quite a lot of nice green ones and substantial. Well done. Now we can go on to agenda item 10, yes? Are you introducing Yasmin? Yes?
I am, Chair, yes, thank you. For each quarter, we follow up all high and medium level recommendations that we have issued throughout the year. There were in total 10 recommendations that were due for the end of June. These were in relation to contract management, channel shift, planning services and key financial systems. Of the 10 recommendations, 6 recommendations are now complete. One of those was a high for contract management, and the 5 medium ones covered contract management and channel shift. For the 4 medium recommendations that remain incomplete, 2 were around the main financial systems audit reviews. One was around creditor reference transactions. We matched the creditor reference transactions to the creditor reference supplier list and found that they didn't always match. And there is some work being investigated by the IT team in terms of investigating this matter further. There was also a recommendations around having 149 duplicate bank details on the system for the suppliers when they were set up. This is mainly just due to a cleansing process within the system, and there was no fraudulent activity undertaken. Again, this is one to be followed up in October at the next audit committee. We also had 2 further recommendations for planning services. So one was around the validation strategy that required updating. That's currently under review and not being done as of yet, and hopefully will be implemented by October. And then again, there was one around action plans being updated for different streams, and they're looking to finalise that in October. So those are all in progress. But overall, good progress has been made across those 10 recommendations.
Any questions? Susanna?
Yeah, I think, as a novice to this committee, I think that the recommendation tracker and the implementation tracker and so on, it seems very good, and I think congratulations on that. But I wonder, if I read between the lines, it looks as though it's sometimes quite difficult to get things implemented. If you look at page 100, you say, we gave people 6 weeks to respond. We subsequently chased officers throughout July. So is it quite hard to get things done on time?
To be honest with you, I think that's the wrong use of word, if I'm honest, around chasing. We've got a really good follow-up process in place now. So any sort of overdue recommendations that are not being, if we're not getting any sort of responses, we'll speak to ODG, present our follow-up recommendations there, and we've got Nigel on hand as well, who'll be doing the chasing rather than us. So it goes absolutely fine usually. So yeah, thank you.
Glad to hear it. Thanks.
I think the chaser is about to respond.
Nudge,
Well,
I think, Chairman.
It's just to give us some assurance. Actually, I think this year with the pandemic, there's lots of things that are being chased, basically. But I take this particular report very seriously, and as Jasmine says, if she has any problems, basically, she can come to me, and people soon respond actually accordingly. But it has been really difficult, I think, this year. This incident, this was one of the key issues in the Croydon review, actually, that the CFO wasn't being listened to, internal audit weren't being listened to, recommendations not being followed up. So this is something which is dear to my heart, sort of thing, and we get onto it as soon as we can. There are some outstanding audit recommendations here, which again are picked up and they refer to QL and things like that. And again, that's just pure workloads, actually. But the ones that are referred to in here around creditors, sort of thing, we have done initial assessment. It's not fraudulent area. It's not anything else. It's stuff that it's housekeeping on things like purging the suppliers off the system and stuff like that, which unfortunately at the moment we are struggling to do, actually, given the volumes of QL and other competing work demands. But I can assure you we follow this up, and if Yasmin gets any problems, basically, then yeah, I do come in.
Right, follow
Nigel,
and then Ros.
Yes, because Nigel mentioned Croydon, and it's interesting that you say that internal audit wasn't listened to. What about external audit? Were they not doing their job?
I seem to recall both sets of auditors were recommendations being put forward, basically, were not listened to. It makes it very difficult, and if you've got the CFO not being listened to, basically, I mean, that's the position that they were in, and that's why they got into that position. They just weren't listening to anybody, and if you're not listening to external audit, internal audit, and CFO, then it's no wonder that you get into the position that Croydon were in, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry. Can I just go back to the recommendations that are complete and things, and it mentions current progress as well too. It mentions a new procurement strategy. Better sort of contract management guidance will be in that document. So, but it mentions September 2022. That's over a year's wait before we have the new procurement strategy. Is that right? I mean, we're going to wait for over a year for a new procurement strategy, Nigel?
Could I just ask where there was something that was read? I mean, it's the same point, which it was. It's down as complete. And I just wonder what is being done to keep on top of that, because it was a read recommendation, and it seems, I take Ros's point there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It says September 22. We implemented a new procurement strategy, which came into effect only 12 months ago, actually, and we put a 2-year time period on the current strategy. Reason we did that because there were a lot of movements and things like social value in particular, actually, which we wanted to incorporate, and that is a moving feast. So the next refresh will be September 22. Now, it does say there that there be documentation within that, but even within the current strategy, albeit a 2-year one, we are undertaking work on contract management. So I can assure you there is work being undertaken on contract management as we speak, and perhaps this is referring to the more documentation will be in the next refresh of the strategy, actually. But it doesn't mean to say we're just sitting back on contract management and doing nothing at the moment. We are actively doing stuff at the moment.
Sorry, any other questions, comments? If not, may we please, again, we're asked to note this, and many thanks, and proceed then to the internal audit follow-up, companies oversight, agenda item 11. Which of you, Gurpreet or Yasmin, will introduce that?
It'd be myself again, Chair. Thank you. So we presented the company's oversight internal audit report at the last audit committee. As there were quite a few findings in this one, we decided to report this separately. There were 9 recommendations issued in total. Of those, 5 were medium recommendations and 4 were low-level recommendations. From those, 12 of those, they make up 15 sub-recommendations, and 12 of those recommendations have been implemented, and 3 sub-recommendations are currently not due and will be followed up in due course. I believe is somebody else introducing the recommendations. Is it Simon or Nigel? Sorry.
We have Simon Howick here from ODS, and is Catherine with you as well, or is it just you, Simon?
Yes, good evening, everybody. Simon Howick here, Managing Director of ODS. I do have on the call Catherine Pridham, who is Non-Executive Director for ODS, and she's also the Chair of our Audit Committee. And with the committee's permission, I'll ask Catherine to give an overview of the work that we've been doing. So, to be clear, the company's audit covers not just ODS, but I am referring to what I'm calling Recommendation 6, which is a request that on an annual basis, the summary audit plans of ODS and OCHL are presented to this committee. So, Chair, if that's all right, I'll ask Catherine to do that, and you may wish Catherine to turn her camera on.
Thank you. Yes, over to Catherine, please. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, so good evening. I'm here representing ODS as Chair of ODS's Audit Committee. The internal audit function for ODS, like OCC, is provided by BDO, and the audit plan, again, is based on risk identified, and it's prepared on a rolling 3-year basis. Due to the size of the internal audit engagement for ODS, BDO were unwilling to offer an overall audit opinion. I think they indicated that they would really need approximately 100 days of engagement as compared to the 25 to 30 days that are currently contracted. However, I can provide a summary of their opinions on the 2 audits undertaken on behalf of ODS and highlight the 2 audits undertaken on behalf of OCC, which are relevant to ODS, which your committee would already have had sight of. And on behalf of the Audit Committee and the Board, I'm also happy to provide assurance on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of our governance, risk management and system of internal control, which is based not only on the work of BDO, but also further assurances that we've gathered in addition to that. Probably best to say to start with that in their annual report to us, BDO confirmed that our management team have responded positively to reports issued, and also that all recommendations have been completed, with the exception of any from the prior year that were expected to be resolved by the QL implementation, which is obviously still ongoing, or any that are not yet due. So essentially we're up to date with implementation of all of the recommendations. And that is something that the Audit Committee follows up on and checks. So I'll start with governance and risk management assurance, and then I'll move on to our assurance with regards to internal controls. Good governance includes obviously not just the governance framework and risk management, but also reporting and adherence to laws and regulations. So primarily our assurance was obtained from a governance framework audit, which was commissioned by ODS, but also the company's oversight audit commissioned by OCC that you've just been referring to. Both of those had moderate ratings, so we're getting obviously assurance from that. The governance framework audit concluded really on the adequacy of risk management within ODS and highlighted significant improvements that have been made. Really, we historically had been using frameworks and policies that were OCCs, so we've now established framework and policies that are ODS specific. We have risk appetite statements in place, risk registers, training modules. We formalise reporting lines to make sure there's appropriate oversight and challenge of risks. There's now we've had a fraud risk assessment that was undertaken, and we've now got a fraud risk register in place. The report also noted that as the commercial arm of the company develops, i.e. ODSTL, work is underway to establish a sound and appropriate governance structure for that company. I can detail recommendations of any of the audits at the end if you should wish, but in the interests of time, I'll just move on. As far as the company's oversight audit, again, moderate assurance, I don't intend to reiterate that because you've obviously had details of that. There were conclusions specific to ODS, which included the need to review the SLAs between ourselves and OCC, the nomination of an interim OCC representative to the ODS board, which has already happened, and then consideration by the shareholders as to the future direction in relation to the pipeline of procurements of supplies and services by both OCC and its wholly owned companies. So in addition to the internal audit assurance, there are other non-audit sources of assurance. The company has now got anti-fraud, money laundering, whistleblowing policies in place, and they've been reviewed by the audit committee and importantly have been communicated to the workforce. Financial oversight has been a particular priority for the ODS board, and there's been a huge amount of work by the finance team, both within ODS and OCC, such that the board are comfortable with the rigour and reporting that was put in place up to the end of the financial year 2021. As I'm sure you're aware, there are currently a number of QL issues that need to be resolved as a matter of urgency in order for that reporting to be in place again. Other sources of assurance, I think, could be evidenced by the maintenance of accreditations that are, of course, subject to external reviews of compliance. And for both ODSL and newly for ODSTL, we have accreditations for quality management systems and environmental management systems. And in addition, health and safety compliance was covered in the resource work programme audit, which I'll come on to. So those are really our sources of assurance with regards to governance and risk management. Moving on to internal control assurance. Again, this is based on moderate ratings for the audits concerned. The OCC accounts receivable audit, which got substantial moderate assurance rating, is obviously relevant to ODS because our accounts receivable is a shared service upon which we draw. ODS conducted a resource work programme audit and we received moderate assurance on that. That was to provide assurance on the control environment around resource work planning. And the conclusion was that overall there are appropriate procedures and controls in place to mitigate the risks reviewed, such as adequate and appropriate resourcing, the identification and monitoring of financial risks, contingency plans in the face of disruption to the external environment. Well, we've certainly had that this year. Health and safety compliance. So the report highlighted that ODS responded quickly to the onset of COVID-19 and ensured activity risk assessments and workforce recovery plans were subject to ongoing review. The budget was reforecast early in the year, and actual information was reconciled promptly to key summaries provided to management. Business continuity plans were enacted and, of course, well and truly tested, and there have been updates as a result of that. So in addition to that audit, the other main source of internal control assurance is the review of company-wide internal control questionnaire responses that was compiled by every part of the business, which indicated that there is generally a sound system of internal control and controls are being applied consistently. Again, if you require any more details with regards to that, I can supply. So that really concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from committee members? If not, maybe I can just ask one or two. There's, I think this is on page 112. I mean, I know these are meant to be recommendations complete. I know there was some discussion about cooperating with the council on procurement. It's mentioned once or twice in recommendations complete, and I know in the past there have been some discussion about service level agreements, maybe not with ODS, it might have been, for all I know, with the housing company. Are these, I'm not sure to whom I should be asking this, are these issues satisfactorily resolved? There's a form of words on page 112. The independent auditor comments, the importance of procurement in some situations has been explained to ODS, so the recommendation is complete. Has it been implemented besides being explained?
Chair, that's probably one for me, if I may, because I'm listed as being the recipient of that explanation. With the greatest respect, I did find that a little odd, because I do understand procurement in some detail and the necessity for the council to demonstrate value for money. And I feel that on procurement, we have come a long way in terms of the council and ODS working together to optimise the benefits of the TECL arrangement whilst ensuring that we meet the requirements of it. Yes, it has been explained to me and it is implemented, so that's fine. On the second bit, I think, again, Nigel might want to comment here. I think we found a good accommodation where, we've had some discussions around, I guess, group purchasing, economies of scale. And I believe where we've got to, we all agree that, where the council and its companies are buying the same things, the same goods or services, it makes entire sense to do this together. Equally, we have agreed that there are times where there's difference, and we should go about our own routes. Not least because the council and the TECL company have to comply with the Public Contract Regulations 2015, whereas ODS TL does not. So that is clearly something which needs to be managed. So I think we're in good shape on procurement. We and the council agree how we go about it. Nigel and I have worked quite a lot on it, and he may wish to just come in with a comment from his perspective.
Thank you. I think Simon. Yeah. Thanks, Simon. Nigel.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just to echo Simon's comments, really, that we had quite a bit of discussion with Simon on ODS in particular and OCHL and the respective procurement leads in both organisations, or all three organisations. It has to make sense when you're in a group, basically, to do things for the good of the group. And if you can gain from efficiencies in doing that, that's got to be the best way. There may well be some instances where one entity wants to take the lead because it has more vested interest, perhaps in terms of ODS on, say, subcontractors or whatever. But I think that overarching principle to benefit from economies of scale has got to be the right one. I think we resolve that to all our mutual satisfaction. I would just want to say a couple of things around what Catherine said, pick up some of Catherine's comments, and the overall thrust of this report. We've heard from Catherine and the sort of audit by BDO of ODS, and I think it's pleasing to know that at least report back from one of our entities is it's in good shape. The controls are there, sound system of controls, moderate assurance in some cases, and substantive in others. I think that's good to hear, and that's one of the audit recommendations that's made on this report that Catherine as Ned on the ODS reports back. We would have had OCHL as well, but OCHL to date at least have not had internal audit, and therefore have not had the same review that ODS have had actually. But recently we've appointed BDO for all three entities. And certainly next year that I would see the chair from OCHL come in and reporting back on the work that that BDO has done within OCHL. The overall thrust of this audit basically was around the companies. It picked up the lessons learned from the Croydon and Robin Hood Energy. And I think generally I would say that there's a clean bill of health in terms of our governance around our entities and the interaction with the council and its wholly owned companies. A number of medium recommendations, and it was a substantial piece of work. There were, I don't know, upwards of about 20 interviewees that BDO had to go through, and I personally spent a hell of a lot of time pulling all the management responses together actually. But I say, I do think it's got a clean bill of health. There are a few recommendations still outstanding around JDs, etc., for officers within the council, and they're clarifying their role in terms of governance around the companies. But I do expect those to be completed by the end of September, and they will be followed up in the BDO follow-up report. So, but it's pleasing at this stage, basically, as I say, we have been given that clean bill of health on the governance around our companies.
Ros?
Thank you. That's really good to hear, actually. That is good to hear, to have a clear bill of health. This might be more of a performance...
Can you speak into
Sorry,
it more?
This might be more of a performance question rather than an audit question, so if you could bear with me, I apologise if it is. The service level agreements between the council and ODS, do they include the policy with regard to trying to put as much and trying to keep as much subcontract work that ODS does to local businesses? So the SLAs, do they cover the council policy of trying to use local businesses? Maybe this is one for Simon.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I could...
If I may, Chair, not the SLAs, but our procurement strategy is just that. You know, we mirror the council's objectives to, you know, engage with the local economy, and you know, that's very important to us. It's part of our kind of, you know, purposeful business approach. We don't want to compete with the local economy. We want to use it wherever possible. So yeah, absolutely, it's a key part of the way that we do business. And With our business growing, we need to deal with the ebbs and flows of that, and using a subcontract supply chain is a very effective way of doing that, whilst we still want to ensure that we maximise permanent employment to the point that it is sensible to do that, so that we don't place people at risk. So yeah, an important thing, and yes, it's in place.
And I should add that if, in the finance and performance panel, they have targets which are for the companies as well as for the council about the use of local businesses. Chewy?
Yes, Chair. I just wanted to add on that. As a small business champion, we were heavily involved to contribute to the procurement strategy and including the social value. So we did actually input some targets that I can't remember from top of my head, but we did do a lot of work. If it works in practice, that's good. And just to add on, our procurement manager was for both ODS and the council. I don't know if she has gone back, but that was the scenario that time. So a lot of work was input to achieve that.
I'm going to suggest that if that is okay, we can now note and thank both Yasmin and Gurpreet for joining us. I should note, this is very topical. I don't know if you two are aware that yesterday and the day before, we actually had the first experience of the shareholder panel sitting in with the shareholder group in this same room. So that has already been acted upon, changing the way in which the panel and the shareholder work together. So anyhow, thank you both very much. And if that's acceptable, if we note that, can we move on now? I think Adrian is online somewhere waiting to talk to us. And thank you, Simon and Catherine. And
thank
we
you.
can
Good
now
night.
turn on to agenda item 12, the external audit draft report. Adrian?
Yeah, good evening, Chair and Committee. I'll just take the committee through the draft audit results report. If we could just turn the committee to page 121. Is the executive summary, just starting with some updates on materiality. So you'll note on the left-hand column we've given the materiality figure, which was presented in the audit plan, which was presented back at the April audit committee, and then you'll see that we've updated that for the receipt of the draft financial statements in the right-hand column. Again, we're using a very similar benchmark we used in previous years, so it's 2% of gross revenue expenditure. You'll note that there's been an increase between the audit plan and the final version, and a lot of that's driven by some of the additional COVID expenditure which was coming through the financial statements in 2021. And just moving on to page 122. So again, we just give an update at the top around, it's just a reminder that the reporting timescales have changed for 2021. So previously the certification deadline was the 31st of July. That's now been moved back to the 30th of September. And I know there's a committee on the 29th where we'll present back the draft or the final audit results report with our opinion. We just note there some of the additional procedures we've had to undertake as a result of COVID. So this is the second year where we've been auditing virtually, so to speak. And again, having learned from the previous year, we are making good progress with this year's audit in terms of the work that we're doing with Bill and his team. And we have weekly Teams calls and ad hoc calls as necessary to catch up with key individuals. And also we note here some of the information produced by the entity as well. So that's a key part of the work we do, is kind of verifying the completeness, accuracy and appropriateness of the information. So we've used the team sharing facility within Microsoft Teams to do that. And that's been a really useful piece of work that we've done through the audit to kind of verify that. In terms of the status of the audit, I'll come on to that. It's detailed in greater detail at Appendix B, so I'll come on to that later in the presentation. Just moving on to page 123. So this is around the change in the value for money conclusion, which took effect effectively for the first year in 2021. We note here at the top half of the slide just what the specified reporting criteria are. So three key sub-criteria. So we've got financial sustainability, we've got a sub-criteria around governance, and then we've also got one around improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And what the committee will see at the end of the audit is we'll have a commentary against each of those sub-criteria, and then those sub-criteria are actually split into further questions. So in effect, I think there will be 14 or 15 questions we have to answer against. And we'll obviously agree that with Nigel and his team. And just for the benefit of the committee, the commentary should be factual. So it should reflect what's happened within the financial year 2021. And then tied into that will be our overall value for money conclusion. So at the moment, we haven't identified a value for money risk for the council. We are still working through a number of pieces of evidence and still doing that. So at the 29th of September committee, we'll be in a position to give our value for money conclusion, and then the committee will also be able to see our commentary against each of those sub-criteria, and then importantly within each of the questions that flow through from that as well. Just moving through to page 124. The top half is really around audit differences. I'm pleased to report that at this stage we don't have any significant or material issues that we've identified as part of the audit. We note here some of the thresholds we would normally report against, the audit is well progressed, and as I say, we're happy to conclude at this stage we've nothing to bring to the attention of the committee. And then just moving on to page 125. So again, nothing to report in terms of the control environment. So we haven't identified any significant deficiencies in internal control. And again, at the bottom of the page, we just confirm our independence, which we're required to do throughout the audit. Page 126 is a reflection of the significant risks that we've identified in other areas of audit focus. So these would have been presented back in April when we presented the audit plan. Happy to report that we haven't identified any new significant risks. Also at this stage, we don't have anything that we need to bring to the attention of the committee in terms of our findings from the work completed to date. On terms of just working through them, so the misstatements due to fraud or error. So again, that's still underway. We're looking at doing our usual procedures around journal testing, identifying specific areas where we can really focus that work, and then also work around estimates and also any significant unusual transactions. Again, nothing to report on the incorrect capitalisation of revenue. In terms of the valuation of land and buildings, so we had a call earlier today with the internal valuer who met with some of our internal valuation team as well. And they're looking at a number of specific assets in terms of both the investment property portfolio and also other land and buildings, to come back to the audit team with a view as to kind of some of the assumptions and kind of the outcomes of the valuation work that's been completed, both by the internal valuer and also by Carter Jonas, who are also contracted to do some of that work as well. And then just at the bottom half is other areas of audit focus. So we previously reported that we were doing additional work around the accounting for COVID-19 grants. That work's underway. We're waiting for some further information just to support the categorisation of those within the accounts. The pension liability, again, pleased to report at this stage we've got nothing we need to bring back to the attention of the committee. We do still need to get the assurance from the auditors of the Oxfordshire Pension Fund, which should be coming through later in August or early September. And this year there's been no real national issue. I know previously we reported back to previous committees around the McLeod and Goodwin cases, which have been accounted for in previous years. So nothing that we're highlighting in terms of any of those particular issues. The next one below that is going concern, and obviously earlier in the committee we've talked quite frequently about Section 114 notices in various places. So we've identified this as another area of audit focus, and we review a number of pieces of documentation, key documentation, looking at medium-term financial plan, looking at forward cash flows, looking at group cash flows and kind of potential impacts of subsidiaries and what that might mean for the group position. We also take into consideration key things like your reserve position, your usable reserves. So what would happen in worst case scenario and how much of those could you utilise if you needed to. So again, that's a piece of work that will be running through August, and we'll report back to the committee in September in terms of our findings. And then the largest piece that we need to kind of do at the end is kind of the group consolidation. So quite a large group structure with a number of different auditors. So we make contact with those auditors to, depending on the size of the group and also the subsidiaries within that, we then have to contact those auditors to do some specific pieces of work, and we've already done that in terms of our initial planning. and we've had some useful calls with both Wen Townsend and also Mazars as well. And then they formally report back to us in terms of some deliverables. So again, we've had some of the initial deliverables have come back from one of the auditors, and also we're aware that the group subsidiary work is still ongoing for a number of other auditors as well. So again, we'll be hoping to report back to the committee at the end of September on our work on group consolidation. And then if I could just take the committee quickly just through to two of the appendices at the end of the report. So the first one is Appendix B, which is on page 158. And as I say, this just reflects the status of the audit. So we've been completing the audit now for the last 6 weeks or so. We still have a few weeks to go, and then there will be a sort of period of internal review and consolidation. But hopeful that we'll be able to get through the majority of the work, as I say, in the next few weeks, with a view to be able to report back and have the account certified, subject to satisfactory conclusion of all these areas, and also from reporting from the two group auditors as well. And then Appendix C is an initial draft letter of representation. So this is the letter that will be signed at the end of the audit by both Nigel and Councillor Fry as chair of the audit committee. It really just talks you through some of the key representations that we would expect from yourselves at the end of the audit. And again, we'll bring a fuller version at the end for sign off at the end of September. I'll stop there and happy to take any questions on any of the content of the report.
Ros.
Thank you. Thanks, Adrian, for this report. Sorry, just get my closer there. You skipped over areas of audit focus, significant risk, the risk of error in the valuation of land and buildings, and how you're calculating that risk as such. Did you want to add anything extra on that at all? Because you mentioned that this is ongoing work to resolve.
Yeah, so I suppose on the balance sheet, you've got like the two largest numbers are your property, plant and equipment and investment property. And the other large aspect is your pension liability. So in both of those areas, we would use internal specialists. So for the property, plant and equipment and investment property work, we have a team of internal valuers. So effectively, we try and get the valuers from our internal team connected with the two valuers in respect of the council. They then select a sample of assets based on risk and size. So for example, today we had various discussions on different assets ranging from, example, the town hall valuation to the covered market to other investment properties within Oxford City Centre. So again, a small change in any of those key assumptions could have a material impact on the accounts. Some of the assets are multi-billion pound assets with quite large valuations. So really, we want to make sure that the conclusions and the assumptions feeding into those are correct and what we would see within the wider sector as well. Obviously, there is some local variation, and we have to take that into consideration as well. And again, we also would assess the the competency of the two valuers doing that. So hopefully that clarifies the question, but it is quite an intensive piece of work, and it is a big area of focus across the local government sector in terms of the asset valuation piece specifically.
I can see Bill appears again on our screen here. Were you wanting to say anything, Bill, in relation to this valuation, the risk about asset values?
Well, since you prompted me, Chair, the only thing that I would say is that the valuation of assets doesn't actually have an impact on the bottom line for the amount of revenue that's available to the council. So although from an audit perspective and also from my perspective, it's actually a high risk, in terms of the actual accounts themselves, because it's such a high value. From local government accounting, it actually reverses out below the line in the movement of reserves statement. So from councillors' perspective, it doesn't actually impact on the ongoing budget process.
Thank you very much. That was nice and clear. Could I just ask for Adrian, there's this new item, the whole of government accounts, where I think every single government entity, local and national, somehow has to be coordinated. You're talking of being able to complete this by September. What's the state of play on this, and does it entail lots more work?
So yeah, thanks, Chair. Actually, there's been an update on that, and I think Bill might have some further information, but I know there's been some recent correspondence from the NAO, actually, I think, who coordinate this work across the local government sector, that there's been a delay. I think, Bill, I don't know if you can confirm that. I don't know if you've seen any correspondence, but my latest view was that actually the whole of government accounts may actually be delayed. There has been, last year there was a national issue with a new system that they introduced, which means that actually by the end of September, we may not be in a position to do that, depending on the guidance that's come out. I think from an Oxford City perspective, so just for the benefit of the committee, there is a threshold. So if you're over a certain threshold, I think it's 500 million, then you don't need to do the full procedures. So it's quite a limited piece of work. So we need to do some reconciliations between your accounts back to one of the government submission tools. If your expenditure is over 500 million, it's then a much more detailed piece of work, which can take up to maybe 1-2 weeks to do. And that's then consolidated and put back into the NAO for them to be able to kind of do their overall consolidation. So yeah, for Oxford City, it's not as extensive as what it could be elsewhere. The only impact it would mean on the opinion at the end was that we weren't able to do the WGA because of any national delays. There would be we wouldn't be able to issue the closing certificate for the opinion. So we'd make that clear within our final opinion when we give that at the end of September. And then we would still need to do the WGA afterwards if there was any delays within the kind of wider system. It's very similar, as you say, Chair, it's a very similar process across, you know, we've just completed NHS audits, for example, back in June. And there's a lot of consolidation that needs to be done to go back for the Department of Health accounts, which have got quite a quick turnaround to be certified by the end of June.
Thank you very much. Another task for you. Any other questions from committee members? Or may we please, thank you very much. Note your report. Look forward to having the draft accounts, we hope, at our September meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adrian. The next item is, and I'm not sure, I was going to ask, was this already covered at the council meeting? It was meant to be when you read the paper, agenda item 13. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. I don't know if Susan wants to explain or if she'd like me to explain that one.
I'm happy to explain, Jennifer. Thank you. Chair, this item was mentioned in the report to Council last week. Is because the Council's whistleblowing policy forms part of the Constitution, and it's right and proper that the Audit and Governance Committee this evening consider the whistleblowing policy. But because it's a constitutional document, it would actually need the approval of full Council as well. So rather than delaying it until the next Council meeting, a decision was sought from full Council for them to adopt this policy as part of the Constitution, subject to the Audit and Governance Committee this evening being happy with it.
So we still have the veto over this policy. What has changed from the previous? What has changed, if anything, from the previous policy?
I think, Chair, it's simply been made a little bit more robust. The previous policy was quite brief, and there's been quite a thorough review. The review, we would have done a periodic review anyway, but I think it's fair to say that the issue of the whistleblowing policy was raised by the Council's internal auditors when undertaking their company governance audits. They highlighted the need to review the whistleblowing policy to ensure the relationship between the councils and its companies is transparent and accountable. The committee will also recall the report brought in April concerning the conclusions of the MHCLG report on local authority interventions, where they also highlighted the need for a culture of transparency, where staff are actively encouraged to flag concerns or risks. And you've heard this evening as well from Scott Warner as to how it's such a valuable platform to have the whistleblowing policy in terms of internal investigations. So it's actually been quite a thorough review of the policy. Issues in there have been clarified, such as who can rely on the policy, to make it clear that there are other routes available for members of the public or for complaints concerning councillors. So the scope of the policy has been clarified, and I think it's fair to say the emphasis has been increased on the protection afforded to staff who do blow the whistle. There is a statutory protection from the Employment Relations Act 1996, but the policy goes a little bit further than that, and stresses that anybody blowing the whistle, even if their allegation is found to be incorrect, provided they have done so with good intentions in the best interest of the public and reasonably, then they are protected from any detriment in effect.
Thank you very
I'm happy
much
to
for
answer
that
any questions,
explanation.
Chair.
Ros?
Thank you. Yes, this reads really well, and I think protection of whistleblowers is absolutely paramount. So it's good that that has been, as you said, put in more firmer rules. Can I ask, does this relate to councillors blowing the whistle as well, this policy, or not? Or is there a separate policy for councillors blowing the whistle on items or considerations they feel they should do?
Through you, Chair, it would be possible for a councillor to use the whistleblowing policy to raise a concern, but I think there probably are more appropriate methods of raising a concern if it's about individual members of staff, for example, or about service provision. Then it's probably more appropriate for a councillor to have a conversation with the head of service in the first instance. But certainly if they felt that they needed to do so anonymously, or if that sort of conversation didn't produce the outcome that they were satisfied with, then it would be possible for a councillor to use it as well. I think it's fair to say its primary purpose is for staff to raise concerns, but staff is interpreted very widely, so that would include agency staff, employees, others seconded. So I think that it's quite a wide interpretation on who can use it. But I think if somebody is unsure on whether they can use it, then it's best to seek advice from myself in the first instance, or use it. And if it's not an appropriate use, they could be redirected to another policy.
Did I, Chair? I just say thank you, Chair. Could I just say thank you for that? I have to say, as a councillor, but not with this authority, or indeed Oxfordshire County Council, but another authority that I was an elected member, I did have occasion to help staff who wanted to blow the whistle on some bad practice. I'll close that. But they didn't feel confident enough, even with a quite robust whistleblowing policy in place, to go to their line manager first, which is what the policy said. And they actually came to myself as a councillor that's the reason for my original question, just to make it absolutely clear. So I just wondered if there, perhaps going forward, there ought to be some advice for councillors as such, that if they have staff members coming to them for advice, that they are given some indicational training perhaps, or some sage words of advice as to what they should do in that particular situation that I found myself in several years ago.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think through you, Chair, the policy encourages staff to raise the concern with their line manager initially if they feel able to, but there is an acceptance in the policy that some people may not feel able to do that, and in which case they are encouraged to raise their concern with the monitoring officer, the chief financial officer, or the head of business improvement. It is possible that somebody may go direct to a councillor seeking support with that, But I think to comply with the policy, we would be asking that councillor to simply refer the matter to those three post holders, the monitoring officer, the chief financial officer, and the head of business improvement, for them to take that forwards. The other point I would make is that the policy does provide for any individuals that might be apprehensive about blowing the whistle, for them to use a trade union representative or another representative to assist them. So I guess that's where somebody could approach a councillor, and I think that is a fair point, that we should be providing some guidance to councillors as to what to do in that situation.
That would be helpful. I hope it never happens again, but just in case, you know, there's that time when it might. Thank you.
Susanna.
Yes, I agree. It's a good report. I just wondered if we have any way of comparing this council with other councils. For instance, do we have more whistleblowers or fewer whistleblowers than average, or has it improved since this new policy, or is it too new? I suppose it's much too new. I'd just be interested to know more general impressions.
Yes, I think, as Scott mentioned earlier when he presented his report, it is difficult to do benchmarking in terms of whistleblowing cases, because there needs to be a level of sensitivity and confidentiality around them. I mean, I can only talk from my personal experience of conversations with other monitoring officers and my own employment, but I don't feel that we have a particular issue at Oxford, if I can put it that way. I think, you know, that's shown in the report that Scott presented earlier, where in the exempt appendix it did list particular cases, so you would have seen the numbers recently. And I certainly don't think that there is a high level of use of the whistleblowing policy at Oxford.
Well, maybe I didn't make myself clear. I would like to see a high level of whistleblowing, even if it's just kind of minor concerns, because I'd like to feel people are confident to come forward if they have a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the purpose of this policy, is to promote the policy and to encourage staff to come forwards. Sorry, I thought you were asking, you know, how many cases had there been and how often the policy was used. But certainly this reviewed policy does try to encourage staff to use it as widely as possible.
Thank you. I mean, I was just going to say, following Ros's questions, I mean, it might be good to make sure, if it seems appropriate in the code of conduct training, just maybe to have a bullet point to say, if this is raised with you as a councillor, please pass it in the first instance to yourself as monitoring officer or the appropriate head of service, if that's okay. I mean, I was going to ask, however, especially given the hour, are the members of the committee willing? We have to approve this report. Are we willing to approve it? Can I take the nodding as meaning we all approve it? In which case, yes. Sorry. And approve the policy. Yes. Sorry. Yes. I'm taking the nodding as meaning approve the policy. So thank you very much, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we have, and I'm sure it'll be brief, the SIP for Financial Code. This is what we've all been waiting for. This is Nigel's star role.
I'll make it brief, Chair, actually. So, yeah, as the name suggests, this is a report on the new code which SIP for the Institute, Accounting Institute, has brought out, actually. It sets out standards of financial management for local authorities. And it was due to come into force, basically, in compliance with the code by all local authorities from the 1st of April 21. There was meant to be a shadow sort of exercise of compliance in 2021, but clearly the pandemic got in the way of that, actually. But it is still required to be complied with from 1st of April 21. The report sets out the code, actually, through way of sort of principles, basically, that are outlined in paragraph 5, details all the standards which both the Chief Financial Officer, the leadership team and even elected members should adhere to in order to show responsibility in terms of complying with the code. And the standards are all laid out basically within the report, together with a commentary largely by myself as how I believe that we comply with all of those standards. So the report's fairly self-explanatory, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nigel. Any questions on all-important CIPFA financial code? I take no comment is great approval for this. I think we just have to note it. So thank you very much, Nigel. Final item, besides date of the next meeting at the end of September, is there only two of us, Chewe and myself, who were present at the last meeting. I looked at the minutes, they look wonderful. What do you think, Chewe? Chewe agrees.
Absolutely agree.
So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Yasmin, for staying till the bitter end.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.